While dealing with complaints is never fun, there are methods that can turn the situation to your advantage. In most cases, you can literally take a negative and turn it into a positive. But before we dive in, let's dispel a myth. The customer is always right. Wrong. That's not to say that the customer cannot be right. There are many circumstances where a customer is justified in complaining. No business is perfect, and it's up to you to take an unbiased look at your business practices and see if the customer is indeed right. Always remember that an essential part of making your business successful is to identify and correct shortcomings. Having said that, in a properly managed, organized, and monitored business, it is far more likely that the customer is wrong. Dealing with the customers that are incorrect in their assumptions is an art in itself, and in most cases, the issue won't go away by pretending that the customer is right when they're clearly wrong. Before we get into how to deal with the customer, let's talk about how to stop the Mojo Destroyer. Now, what's the Mojo Destroyer? Most business owners go back and forth between handling difficult clients, managing their business or team, and planning for the future. The latter activities necessitate strong mental skills and a positive attitude. That's your mojo. Making that tweak to your business that will increase profits or leading your team so you can optimize your business can't be done while you feel drained. It may not always be possible, but if you can, try setting time aside for dealing with a difficult client. That way, your state of mind is affected as little as possible. For example, if you have a highly important meeting, you should avoid talking to the client until after that meeting. On the opposite side of the spectrum, if you have a lot of work to get through, but the thought of dealing with a problematic client is weighing heavily on your mind, it might be a good idea to just get it out of the way as early as possible. But first, ask yourself, what's my ROI cutoff on this client? This is real-world advice. As such, no real preparation would be complete without asking yourself, what is your ROI, return on investment cutoff? To put it more bluntly, how far are you willing to go before dealing with this difficult client is not worth it? There are many situations where a business decides to keep the relationship with the client going way past its value or profitability. Clients that constantly have issues may not be worth the investment of time and effort when compared with the benefits that the same client brings in. You need to have a clearly defined red line and stick to it. Knowing where that red line is will guide you towards addressing the client's issues. You must determine how far you're willing to cater to your customer. Now let's prepare for battle. Before confronting any complaints, it is very important to get all your ducks in a row. Information is power, and information is essential. However, most business people jump straight into replying to that email or picking up the phone and dialing the customer. In most cases, this technique is destined for failure. Excluding issues where the company you represent is clearly at fault, most problems are the result of a breakdown in the chain of communication. For example, you may have said one thing to your customer, but they understood something completely different. In the real world, this sometimes happens because there is miscommunication, but sometimes it can happen intentionally. Intentional miscommunication or misrepresentation happens when a client willfully pretends that there was a misunderstanding. In most cases, this is because the customer wants to compensate for their own mistakes. Here is an example of an intentional miscommunication that happens on almost a daily basis in businesses that deal with a lot of clients. The customer says that you or your team did not tell him an important piece of information, even though you were sure that you provided that information to the client. The client is intentionally misrepresenting the facts in order to avoid taking responsibility. When the client calls in, always listen and don't interrupt. It's human nature to want to interrupt someone, especially if what they're saying is completely wrong. Don't do it. Listen carefully, even if you know what they're saying is not true. There are three main reasons for this. 1. Tweak your business. If the customer is correct, you will gain knowledge on how to make your business better and avoid this issue the next time around. 2. Deflate their balloon. A lot of time customers just want to vent. Assuming they are not belligerent, taking a few minutes to listen to their complaint will almost always take the air out of it. You want to avoid cutting them off, especially in the initial stage, so that you have a good grasp on their argument. Nothing irritates a customer more than canned replies from people that did not take the time to understand what they were saying. The third is gathering information. The more information you gather, the better you will be positioned to rebut their arguments later on. Let's go over a few rules of engagement. Now that we've got all of that sorted out, it's time to march into battle. Whether by phone, email, or in person, keep in mind the following. Be polite but firm. In most cases, being either too confrontational or too acquiescent yields little to no results. We're not looking to approach our client with a get-in-your-face kind of attitude, but we also should not ignore things that are demonstrably wrong just to avoid the confrontation with the client. A professional tone with many facts to back it up is the best approach in the majority of situations. So pull up all the communication records and counter any wrong statements that the customer makes. Details win. Let's say the client tells you that we never sent them the quote. Which of the following makes a better argument? 1. We sent you that quote. 2. On Monday, April 12th at 9:47 a.m., we sent you an email with the quote. The second example is buttressed by solid details, which makes it stand out and much harder for people to dispute. Details win, so whenever you can, use lots of details to win. Take it one step further and go for the knockout by pointing out to the client that he replied confirming the quote on April 13th at 1:29 p.m. Lather, rinse, repeat. Don't be afraid to repeat your arguments over and over again, as many times as it takes and as many times as the client brings up the same issue. Many business people feel awkward about repeating the same thing again and again. A common tactic for customers is to bring up the same problem over and over again and see if they get a different response. In the example we talked about earlier, the customer complained that they never received a quote. Now, most business people will reply with the argument, well, sure, on Monday, April the 12th at 9:47 a.m., we sent you an email with a quote, which you confirmed by email on April 13th at 1:29 p.m. But a problematic customer will bring up the same exact issue minutes later, as if they forgot what you just explained to them. In the majority of cases, the business person feels awkward about repeating the same exact thing again. Don't do that. If a customer brings up an issue for which they were initially given an answer, make sure that you answer them by repeating the argument again. Don't be embarrassed about repeating yourself. If the client is not embarrassed to bring up the same issue 100 times, don't be embarrassed to give them the same answer 100 times. Keep your powder dry. Now, this is a simple concept. Escalate explanations as the client escalates the issue in order to match them. Let's illustrate this by using this example. Client: I didn't get my quote. Office: sorry to hear that, but I see here that we did send you the quote. Client: well, I didn't get it. Office: I see it was sent on April the 12th at 9:47 a.m. Client: really? I didn't get it. Office, actually, as I'm looking at your records, I see that you replied back confirming that you got it on April 13th at 1:27 p.m. Would you like me to forward you a copy of the email where you confirmed you received it? Now, notice how throughout all the conversation, we keep our powder dry and slowly add to our argument as the client continues to claim they did not receive the email. This is a very powerful technique in matching the client. Set the target and don't stray off the path. Another popular technique that difficult clients employ is straying off the path. For example, they'll start talking about how they didn't receive a quote by email. When you point out that they did, they'll quickly pivot and complain that you didn't call them when you said you would. If you answer that concern with solid arguments, they'll drop it and move on to the next topic of discontent. It is very important that you don't follow them. Stick to your path and bring them back to the straight and narrow. To do that, we need to set the target. The target is the motive for them being disgruntled. You should limit it to one single issue if possible. Chasing too many rabbits is not to your advantage. Also, multiple complaints that are not warranted indicate a customer that is actively looking for reasons to be upset. Make sure you pin down the customer to the main issue. Address that issue and don't go chasing other issues even if the customer brings them up. Let's go back to our client not having received the quote. Once you explain to them that the quote was sent, they'll move on to another complaint. Slowly, bring back the conversation and tell them that you want to address all of their concerns, but we need to do it one at a time. Ask them if they agree that the initial issue was settled. Politely but firmly bring them back to the path by having them admit that the issue was not as they presented it. This way, you will have eliminated most of their other complaints. The customer will quickly realize that you will not move on to another issue and let them make tons of unfounded accusations. They will have to make each claim individually and wait for you to respond to it. This will quickly take the wind out of their sails. Most chronic complainers don't want to take the time to go over their issues individually. We will talk about what you need to do to equip your business for success against difficult clients in future videos. Hey, make sure to give a thumbs up if you like this kind of raw and unfiltered real-world business advice. Also, consider subscribing so you can get more content to help you in real business situations. Thank you for listening to The Raw Business Deal.